Numinous Podcast with Carmen Spaniola.
Hi there, and welcome to the Numinous Podcast, where we have interesting conversation with everyday folks about the mystery of life. This podcast is a complement to the Numinous School, my online intuition development course. And it's produced with the support and encouragement of my patrons, listeners who enjoy the show and let me know with a financial high five. If you'd like to become a patron of the show, I'll let you know how at the end of the episode. This week I'm speaking with Sheila Webster. She's a reflexologist and a life mentor, and she has a really calming, grounding, healing presence, which is what I think makes her story even more touching. I connected with Sheila over the phone. She was at home in Victoria, BC. So Sheila, how old were you when your mother died?
I was 11.
You were 11 years old. And did you realize that she was dying?
I don't think I was. I like she was sick, and I observed her being physically sick. Well, we did have a family meeting with the oncologist at one point, but I can't remember in that meeting if we were told of the prognosis specifically. But there was definitely a tone of seriousness in that meeting, I remember, as a child.
Were people mainly talking about sickness? Did anybody ever talk to you about dying or death?
Not at all. Not at all.
What do you remember of your family's emotional state when you look back at that time?
I would say confusion and probably repression of what was happening. A disbelief and it's probably just great sadness through the whole process.
Was your mom sick for very long?
She was. I had to check with my sister about that recently, and I thought it was about 2 years, but it was probably in around a year, maybe a little bit longer.
Yeah. So can you tell me about the day that she died?
Yeah. The day that she died, I was actually out of town at my cousin's place with two of my cousins, Lori and Sherry. And their mother was my mom's sister, and my aunt and uncle were in the city to go bowling, and my mom had passed away that late afternoon. So they came home to give me the news that my mom had passed, and so I wasn't home with my family when I got the news of her dying.
And what happened immediately after? What do you remember of that time? You know, maybe was there a funeral? Who were you with? Who were you talking to? What were you doing in the days and weeks that followed?
Yeah, boy, my heart is just racing, bringing this all back. Well, when my aunt told me the news, I remember bursting out crying and running up the stairs and crying, feeling like, because that's what I should have done or had to have done, because you hear your mom's dead and that's what you do. And then I went blank. I actually had a memory lapse from that point on to her prayers. And I was brought up Catholic, so in the Catholic religion, you have prayers a few days before the funeral. And then so my next memory from being at my aunt's and crying is being at the funeral in the family room with my immediate family. And my brother is known to wear gray wool socks no matter the season and whatever else he's wearing. And I remember us laughing at the fact he's wearing these gray socks. And recently it was bothering me that I didn't have a memory in between those two occurrences. And then a memory came back to me. And I I remember going back home. I think my aunt and uncle drove me back to the city and coming in and seeing one of my sisters in the kitchen. And it was a real kind of like a slow motion episode in today's mind anyway. My dad and my brother were out and two of my sisters were home. And it was just this kind of casual, where's dad? Oh, him and Bruce are gone shopping for a casket. Where's Cindy? Oh, she's in the bedroom. And then that was it. It was just this kind of emptiness, and like life carried on. And so I didn't talk to anybody. Nobody talked to me about what happened. not that I recall anyway. If they did, it was probably too painful and I've repressed it, but I don't think that was the case. This was back in 1978, and back then there weren't a lot of support systems in place or knowing within families, I think, how to deal with death or even talk to children about death.
Mm-hmm. What was it like for you then growing up as a teenager without your mother? Like, I'm just trying to imagine, so we're both mothers of daughters of about that same age that you were when your mother died. And it's so painful. How did you go through that?
Yeah, well, I think growing up is hard enough, let alone without your mother. And as I see my daughter at that age now, it's really trying because I just think like nobody tended to my emotions of grief at that young age, and shame on them, on the adults in my life, my dad specifically, for not tending to that. So, it's how was I as a teenager? I was lost. I mean, I had some close friends and we'd go drinking and stuff. I was pretty young when I started drinking. Nothing addiction like, but just consuming. And so kind of alone, I would say. And my dad was dealing with his own grief. So, he did what he did, going out and about for his solace, I guess, or his mourning. And all of my siblings were older. So for a few years there, I felt very much on my own, I suppose, but didn't realize it at the time. You just did what you did, right? Yeah. And I guess that feeling just perpetuated through into my 20s. Just that feeling lost and seeking some sort of guidance outside of myself.
Mm-hmm. When did you realize that you needed to attend to your grief and needed to address your mother's death and sort of the aftermath that you carried into your 20s?
I've had a few episodes of that through my lifetime. The first time would have been in my early 20s when I worked for a corporation that had counselors on site. And I kind of remember going through this phase of always thinking of my mom and talking about my mom. And I just went to see one of the counselors to talk about that. And I remember him saying, "Are you angry at your mom for dying?" And I hadn't nailed that emotion. But yeah, I was really angry that she left or had to die. So that was probably the first time where I faced it head on. And then a couple of years after that, I remember thinking, kind of switching it around and thinking of my mom, like being in her situation and leaving 5 kids with a husband who necessarily wasn't a hands-on type of father. And just again had another, emotional outburst of what that must have been like for her to know that she was dying and leaving 5 of her children behind at varying ages. And then I guess when I had my daughter, I don't know if it was so much going through facing the grief of mother loss, but just feeling really lost as a mother. Like, how do I do this? And not really having anyone to replace that that maternal role where you would typically go for guidance on mothering. And then it happened a couple months ago on retreat. I was on a soul retreat, your retreat. And I just, through a journey of the heart chakra, realized that all these years I've been persevering outside of myself, something greater than myself, or something to fulfill myself outside of me. And what I realized in that journey was that when my mom died, my heart broke. And essentially I lost my best friend. And sadly, didn't realize that at the time. And so all my adult life, I was trying to fulfill that gap. And on your retreat, just realized that my heart had been in pieces all these years, and I tried to fulfill that through, intimate relationships or various types of jobs. Lots of change in my life, always trying to stimulate that vacant emotion, or that hole left with her gone, I guess. Yeah, so it was in that moment I realized that I got my heart back and kind of labeled it.
So how do you live with the grief and also the love you feel with your mom now?
How do I live with it? Well, I don't know. Grief has become a very interesting part of living for me as of lately. And so I don't necessarily attach my feelings of grief to mother loss. However, having recently gone through a marital separation and feeling the grief of that separation, it evoked those emotions that I think first became of me when my mom died. And so it brought me back to that sense of loss. And so now it's almost like it's just I'll call it a transferable skill. So my daughter and I found a dead squirrel in our driveway a couple of weeks ago, and we buried it. And I found myself looking at this hollow shell of a living thing, and I felt grief for that squirrel. So it's just this sense of loss for many things in our world today. And how do I live with that? I guess allowing myself to feel it primarily, and not trying to bury it or find something else to mask it. And I think just having a grand appreciation for very small details in life.
So as a mother, I have to say, I mean, I think as a woman, I'm pretty together, and I would say you're a really together kind of person. We're both pretty grounded, practical. I think people would describe both of us as pretty solid. But when it comes to my role as a mother, I often feel very fragile, and when I think about leaving the world, I sort of vacillate at times between feeling pretty darn comfortable that I've made enough of it. I've left enough of an impression on my daughter that she'd be okay. But I just can't think of anything that I fear more than either my daughter dying or me dying at a time that I feel that she's, young and vulnerable. And I can't even imagine, I'm estranged from my mother, but it doesn't feel the same as death. I'm wondering if having your mother die at such an early age adds a layer of anxiety around mothering or around your relationship. And I'm just, I know I'm totally projecting onto you here, but has that ever crossed your mind?
Always.
Yeah.
I don't obsess about it, but it definitely has caused a certain level, I'll say, of intensity in my mothering, because I take the connection with my daughter probably to the extreme in some people's eyes, but I just get the importance of the connection. And I because she's at the age now when my mom was sick, I look at her and I think, gosh, if something happened to me now, if I died, she would not remember a lot of me, because I don't remember a lot of my mom. I have memories now, but they're faceless memories. And so I just think, wow, like I've done so much with my daughter, and she could very well not remember my face. And it's kind of disturbing. And more recently, again, with the marriage separation, my ex-husband has gone on, and, he's seeing someone, and they're going on vacation with my daughter at the end of summer for a couple of weeks. And that has been really surreal, because, it's almost like there's a family happening outside of myself. And I said to my ex-husband, it's like I'm dead and life is continuing on, but I'm here to witness it, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And so I'm kind of mourning my own death in a sense. This is very recent, where I'm just imagining yeah, like if I died, because we always project we're going to live into, 20 years or 30 years or whatever it is. What if I died tomorrow? This is what it would look like. Like she would be enveloped in his life with his girlfriend or, a future girlfriend, what have you. And life would just carry on in a sense. So that's really tough. It's really tough. And I mean, I don't know. I keep a journal. I've written in a journal for her since she was born, just reciting my observations of her and her character and my love for her. And I guess that's a tribute or a gift that I hope one day, if I do die before her, that she'll have that in her possession and have memories based on the words in there. Yeah.
How do you live then differently? Because I would imagine that if you're like, whoa, this is what life looks like if I die and everybody moves forward. So does that affect how you are in relationships, say with your husband's new partner, or, do you modify at all the way you are in the world because of this sense? It kind of is reminding me of Carlos Castaneda, in the books about Don Juan, basically that death is always on your left shoulder, right? So the
Yeah.
awareness of death always there. How is it affecting how you are in the world?
Yeah, well, I don't know if I could say modifying because it's just me, right? It's just, did I come first or did my experience come first? So I just put a lot of weight on my connections with people. I'm not into superficial stuff. And so, you know, it's really keeping perspective with with the living. And, if my daughter gets upset about something trivial, I'm sure to say, hey, you know what, in the big scheme of life, this is just so unimportant. And, even in the separation and our co-parenting, we're both willing to look at really what's important. And the importance is that our daughter knows that she's loved. And I believe that I carry that through my relationships in general. And may put a lot of pressure on them because of that.
What do you remember of your mother?
I just blogged about this because I used to say I have no memories of her. And when I wrote the blog, all of a sudden these memories poured out of me. I have about a dozen of them. And, I remember sitting on her lap. And again, these are all faceless memories. I remember sitting on her lap, and her frame was very lean and thin. And I remember sitting on her lap in our kitchen and touching her, I don't know what this body part is called, but under our Adam's apple, we have that hole kind of where the collarbone meets. I remember playing with that, and hers was really deep and sticking my fingers in there. I remember her gardening. I remember her cleaning the house all the time. I remember her, cooking beef stroganoff in front of our stove with our cast iron frying pan. So it's kind of these flashes of a figure. I remember play fighting with her, and she'd do this arm slap thing. And she was a very well-natured, good-humored woman.
Have you ever dreamt about her or felt like you were in conversation with her at all?
Okay, only one comes to mind, and that was through a guided meditation with you, Carmen, where you guided me through a garden. It was a rose garden. And I remember, again, it was faceless, but she was wearing this beautiful pink gown. And I don't even remember if we exchanged words in that meditation or not, but her presence was felt. And I can't say that I've really felt her presence since she's died. I believe she's with me and around me, and I can talk with her, but I don't actively do that, if you will. I more do that with my dad, who passed away 6 years ago, because I think that's an adult memory that I can really identify with and remember his character. Yeah.
So you said earlier, shame on the adults who never talked to me about my grief at the time. And you implied that, your dad withdrew after your mother's death, was kind of doing his own thing when he was mourning, and I presume totally overwhelmed with 5 kids.
Yeah.
So what was it like during his dying?
Yeah, well, I think that in my relationship with my father, for a long time, I put a lot of expectation on him to be this dad that I wanted him to be. And at some point, maybe in my late 20s, I realized that that would never happen. Like I had an unreasonable expectation of him as who he was. And then I became a friend as opposed to a daughter, in a sense. And so when he was on his deathbed, well, I had 3 months because he was given a diagnosis. So I made sure I called him every night to say goodnight. And I asked him every question I could think of about life and about dying and about my mom and, just whatever I could think of. And I remember being in the hospital when he was on his deathbed and he was unconscious. And I remember saying to him, I have no more words left to say, because I felt like I had asked him everything I could ask him. And there was an emptiness there. And so it was just really being physically present, with the rest of my family, being around him, and being witness to him dying. So I felt that there was closure with his passing, unlike my mother's.
Did he ever say anything to you or explain what was going on for him during your mother's death? Did it ever come up in conversation?
I just remember him saying one time I had asked if I could meet with him to talk about my mom specifically, and it was really interesting because we sat at the kitchen table and I just asked if I could come and talk to him one Saturday morning, and we got there and sat at the table like my family often did. And as soon as we sat down, he just said, "You're here to talk about your mom, aren't you?" And I said, "Yeah." And he kind of almost read my mind, and he just said, "You felt alone. You felt like there was nobody there for you." And so he knew what, as a child, I went through. And basically me, showing up to have that conversation, then he revealed those things. He didn't talk about what it was like for him, only that like he cried during that conversation. And I remember him saying in other occasions how you never forget them when, like, your first spouse when they die or whatever, but not specifically the anguish. Yeah.
So what do you think you've inherited from your mother?
Well, her looks, for sure. I came across a picture of her, someone posted on Facebook, I'll say a year or so ago, and I just almost fell off my chair because I was looking at myself and I didn't realize that I looked so much like her. And that was comforting, because not having that face in my memories and seeing my face in her was just unbelievable to me. I don't know. I'd have to ask the people who knew her, who know me, what I have of hers.
So the part of you who does know, the part of you that has a hunch about
her humor, her kindness, her ability to just say, get on with it. Just get on with it. And really being a peacemaker. Being a peacemaker.
Yeah. That's all really good stuff. That's like pretty substantial. That's great.
Yeah, it is.
So the last question on the Numinous podcast comes from the Proust questionnaire. So Sheila, what do you consider perfect happiness?
Well, I think that term is bullshit. I used to strive for happiness, and I think happiness is like sadness. It's a fleeting emotion. It's not something that can be maintained day to day. And if you try to maintain happiness or perfect happiness, you're just going to wear yourself out. I have moments where there's complete joy. And one of those moments was taking my daughter recently to see Cinderella. And there's this beautiful scene where what's it called? Her fairy godmother transforms this tattered pink dress into this blue illustrious dress. And you know me, I'm not into fashion, but I was captivated by this scene. It was just magical. And while we were in the theater, I thought, wow, I wonder what my daughter is thinking of this. So I looked down at her and she looked at me, and we exchanged this glance that was just like, we both got that moment on the screen and our eyes met, and we were just like just this beaming joy. And that was a pretty happy moment.
Wow. Wow. I can feel it. I can feel it. That's so great. I'm really happy that you and your daughter got to share that kind of joy. That'll be one she'll never forget.
I hope so.
Yeah.
I hope she has a lot of them.
Yeah. Thank you so much for being on the show today, Sheila.
Thank you.
I really appreciate you sharing such intimate, tender details. It's been hard to listen to, but also very beautiful.
Thanks, Carmen.
She's a great example of deep living, isn't she? You can connect with Sheila on her website. Look her up at Mentor for Inspired Living. Thank you so much for spending this time with me today. And in particular, I want to thank all the listeners in Sri Lanka. There's not just one, there's a handful of you in different cities and towns around Sri Lanka. I maybe you guys should have a meetup group. Maybe you already know each other. I have no idea how you found me, but thank you for spending time with me today. And for all of today's show notes, go to my website, carmenspagnola.com, CarmenSpagnola, and click the link for the podcast. And again, that's where you'll find a link to connect with Sheila and read her blog. And that's also where you'll find information about becoming a patron. If you like the show, you can let me know with as little as $1 an episode. You can cancel at any time. Just throw a little something in the tip jar if you like. And finally, to ensure you never miss an episode, sign up to receive notifications at the bottom of my site. Until next time, take care.